Before Sung Jin-Woo became the strongest hunter in history, before he became the literal Shadow Monarch, humanity was already fighting a war it didn't even know existed. Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're untangling a story that starts with a terrified, desperately weak young man just fighting to survive, and ends with him becoming a cosmic entity walking through the shadows. Seriously, how did humanity's absolute weakest weapon transform into the very concept of death itself?
Well, let's dive right into it. Today, we're exploring the complete, overarching timeline of the solo leveling universe. And let me tell you, this isn't just a simple story about dungeon raids or a guy leveling up. It's a massive, multi-dimensional epic. We're talking a timeline that stretches from the literal birth of the universe all the way to the ultimate mind-bending salvation of Earth. We'll be covering everything: the sudden appearance of the first gates, the rise of hunters, Ashbourne's ancient war, Jinwoo's insane transformation, and of course, the apocalyptic final battle against the monarchs. To make sense of this epic franchise, we've broken it down into a chronicle of 6 eras. First up, we've got the ancient cosmic war. Then, Earth enters the conflict. From there, we'll see how Jinwoo becomes the system's chosen player, which leads directly into the rise of the Shadow Monarch. Finally, we'll cover the final war and what exactly happens in life after the war. Let's get started. Era number 1, the ancient cosmic war. Okay, so long before gates ever opened on Earth, the universe was shaped by a single supreme creator known as the Absolute Being. This entity took the universe and essentially split it into light and darkness. From the light, he created the emissaries of God. We know them as the rulers, and their entire reason for existing was to protect worlds. But from the darkness, he created the sovereigns, or the monarchs, who are hardwired with the opposite goal, to completely destroy worlds. So naturally, these two forces were locked in an endless, brutal cosmic war. But here's the really tragic twist. This endless war wasn't about justice or cosmic balance. The Absolute Being created this conflict purely for his own entertainment. It was basically a twisted reality show for a god. When the rulers finally figured this out, they rebelled. They turned on their creator. However, one ruler, a being named Ashbourne, actually stayed loyal to the Absolute Being. He fought his own comrades to defend the creator, and he was struck down. But in the abyss of death, Ashbourne discovered that the Absolute Being had hidden a supreme, terrifying power inside him as a failsafe. Ashbourne rose from the dark, no longer a ruler of light, but as the sovereign of death, the very first Shadow Monarch. So the rulers eventually won that rebellion and defeated their creator. But the monarchs survived, and they just kept right on doing what they were made to do: destroy worlds. Eventually, their sights landed on Earth. Now, the monarchs would invade, and Earth, which had absolutely zero magical energy at the time, was just entirely too fragile. The planet would be utterly annihilated. The rulers, who were still trying to protect worlds, were desperate to save Earth, so they used a divine, cosmic device called the Chalice of Rebirth to literally rewind time by 10 years. They'd reset the clock, try to prepare, and it didn't work. Earth was destroyed again. Over and over they reset time, and over they watched Earth get wiped out. It became clear that throwing a fragile planet into a cosmic war was a losing game. They needed a completely new plan. Which brings us to era number 2. Earth enters the conflict. To stop this depressing cycle of endless destruction, the rulers realized they had to artificially strengthen the planet itself so it could actually withstand the shockwaves of the coming war. To do this, they infused Earth with magic by opening what we call gates. These were portals to pocket dimensions filled with magical beasts and monsters. Now, being exposed to this raw magic triggered secondary awakenings in certain humans, giving them supernatural abilities. These people became the hunters. But here's the catch, and it's a big one. Hunters are rigidly ranked. You've got your E-rank hunters, who are basically just normal humans with a slight buff, all the way up to S-rank hunters, who are walking, talking natural disasters. At the very top, you have the national level hunters, who are actually operating as human vessels, channeling the direct power of the rulers themselves. But here is the absolutely crucial rule of this new world. A hunter's magic power is fixed the exact moment they awaken. That's it. You cannot train to increase your rank. You can't hit the jam and go from a C rank to a B rank. Your power level is completely static. You get what you get. And that harsh reality brings us to this young man, E-rank hunter Sung Jin-Woo. He was known globally and mockingly as humanity's weakest hunter. Honestly, his contribution to dungeon raids literally just amounted to trying not to die. He was the guy who carried the bags and inevitably ended up in the hospital. So you might be wondering, why on earth did he keep fighting? Well, Jin-Woo was desperate. His mother, Park Ching-hye, was suffering from a magically induced coma known as eternal slumber. It's a disease caused by exposure to mana, and the life support required to keep her alive was astronomically expensive. So Jin-Woo was risking his life day in and day out in low-level dungeons, taking beatings from basic goblins just to pay her massive hospital bills and keep his younger sister in school. He was a guy pushed to the absolute edge.
Moving on to part 3, the system's chosen player.
Jin-Woo's tragic, static life was about to be completely shattered. During what was supposed to be a totally standard, low-level D-rank raid, his party stumbled into a hidden, secondary dungeon, the infamous Double Dungeon. Inside, they found this massive, terrifying room filled with towering, inert stone statues. Suddenly, the massive stone doors slam shut. The statues come alive, and an absolute massacre begins. Jin-Woo quickly realizes they aren't just fighting monsters. They're trapped in a twisted, lethal game with 3 rigid commandments. Commandment 1, revere God. This required them to bow before a colossal, grinning statue that literally fired heat vision from its eyes, incinerating anyone standing. Commandment 2, praise God. This forced the bleeding, panicked survivors to run to specific statues, holding musical instruments to appease them. And Commandment 3, prove your faith. This was a final, agonizing test of sacrifice at an altar of blue flames. As the remaining statues closed in, Jin-Woo made the ultimate sacrifice. He forced the few remaining survivors out the door and stayed behind alone. Lying on the altar, broken and bleeding out, as a massive stone sword swung down to end his life, everything just froze.
Instead of dying, Jin-Woo wakes up in a normal hospital bed with a glowing holographic screen floating right in front of his face. He survived, but he was changed. He had been selected as the sole player of something called the System. Now, the ultimate takeaway here, the reason this changes the entire history of the world, is that the System completely broke the world's static power paradigm. Remember how hunter ranks couldn't change? Well, the System treated Jin-Woo's life like a video game. It assigned him grueling daily quests, 100 push-ups, 100 setups, a 10-kilometer run, and it would literally penalize him by throwing him into survival zones if he failed. But most importantly, completing these tasks and killing monsters allowed him to gain experience points. He could manually allocate stat points to his strength, his agility, his intelligence. Jin-Woo was no longer bound by his E-rank awakening. While the rest of the world was stuck, he possessed the unique ability to grow infinitely stronger.
Which sparks era number 4, Rise of the Shadow Monarch. And man, did he grow stronger. Through daily quests, ruthless survival scenarios, and taking down bosses like Kasaka and Cerberus, Jin-Woo pushed past every human limit. Eventually, the System threw him into a brutal job change quest. When he survived that gauntlet, he wasn't handed a standard combat class like a knight or an assassin. No, he was given a highly unique hidden class, Necromancer, which almost immediately evolved into the Shadow Lord. By speaking one incredibly chilling, iconic word, arise, Jin-Woo unlocked the ability to extract the mana of any enemy he defeated. He could literally resurrect their soul into a perfectly loyal, immortal shadow soldier that fought for him. He wasn't just a strong hunter anymore. He was becoming a one-man army. Every time he fought a horde of monsters, his own army just got bigger. As Jin-Woo progressed, his power scaled exponentially because he started recruiting some seriously heavy hitters to be his key shadow commanders. First was Igris, a blood-red knight of immense skill and honor that he defeated during his job change quest. Later, he recruited Tusk, a massive spell-slinging high orc shaman. But the real turning point was the Jeju Island crisis. This island had been completely overrun by mutated S-rank ants that were literally slaughtering humanity's top hunters on live television. Jin-Woo intervened, single-handedly turned the tide of the battle, and extracted the terrifying Ant King, creating the Shadow General Baru. This moment changed his reputation globally overnight, and much later he even added Belian, the Grand Marshal of the original Shadow Army, a being born from the World Tree itself. Every single enemy he faced was just future recruits for his squad. By the end of his journey, I want you to really grasp the sheer scale of Jin-Woo's forces. His army didn't number in the hundreds or even the thousands, 10 million. He eventually amassed an army of 10 million immortal shadow soldiers. He had ascended from a struggling, ridiculed human into a literal cosmic powerhouse capable of rivaling entire nations. He could create absolute spaces of darkness, domains where the very concepts of pain and death were entirely under his control. This brings us to era number 5, the Final War. But as you can probably guess, all of this power was being given to him for a reason.
That ancient cosmic conflict that started before time itself, it was finally spilling over onto Earth. The monarchs, specifically the Frost, Beast, and Plague monarchs, descended with their armies to wipe out humanity once and for all. This left Jin-Woo, his massive shadow army, and a handful of loyal hunters standing as the only things between Earth and total annihilation. During this apocalyptic invasion, Jin-Woo experiences a profound emotional revelation. He receives the memories of Ashbourne, the original Shadow Monarch we talked about earlier. Ashbourne reveals that the system was actually a tool designed to slowly acclimate Jin-Woo's human body to hold Ashbourne's overwhelming power. He chose Jin-Woo not just because he was resilient, but because Jin-Woo had danced with death so many times yet still valued life. He wanted Jin-Woo to end the ceaseless violence of the cosmos. Embracing this destiny, Jin-Woo fully inherits the Black Heart, becoming the true, undisputed god of death. But this war is brutally tragic. It costs him dearly, including the heartbreaking sacrifice of his own father, Il-hwan, who uses the last burning embers of his ruler-granted power to protect Jin-Woo from the monarchs when he is vulnerable. The entire war ultimately culminates in an earth-shattering clash with Antares. Now, Antares is the king of dragons and the monarch of destruction. He is the strongest of them all. His power is so unfathomably immense that just breathing could literally erase the fabric of existence. It's Jin-Woo's absolute greatest challenge. But Jin-Woo isn't just powerful. He's a brilliant combat tactician. He realizes he can't beat Antares in a straight-up brawl on Earth without destroying the planet in the process. So he outsmarts the Dragon King. He draws him out, forces him into a vulnerable position, and secretly coordinates with the armies of the rulers who finally arrive to strike down the ultimate evil. With Antares defeated, the monarchs are broken. The war is won.
And that leads us to our final era, life after the war.
So, they won. But the cost of that victory was just too high. Earth was largely in ruins and billions of people were dead. Jin-Woo, now a literal god, could have easily just ruled over the ashes as humanity's savior. But instead, he makes an incredibly selfless choice. He asks the rulers to use the Chalice of Rebirth one last time. He has them reverse time by 10 years, jumping back to a point before the gates ever even opened. But in this new timeline, Jin-Woo doesn't stay on Earth to enjoy his youth. Instead, he willingly enters the dimensional gap, a chaotic realm of eternal darkness between worlds. And there, he spends 27 grueling years hunting down and fighting the monarchs entirely alone. He slaughters every last one of them before they can ever even look at Earth. He chooses to bear the trauma, the endless violence, and the crushing burden of a cosmic war in absolute solitude, all so that humanity can live in a peaceful timeline, completely and blissfully unaware of gates, magical monsters, or the unimaginable horrors they were spared from. After winning his solitary 27-year war, Jin-Woo finally returns to Earth as a seemingly normal teenager. He gets to live the quiet life he always fought for. He eventually marries his old ally, Cha Hae-in, and they have a son named Suho. It's a beautiful, peaceful ending. But, in a universe this big, peace is rarely permanent. Remember how the absolute being was killed way back in the ancient war? Well, his death left a massive cosmic power vacuum, and that vacuum eventually draws the attention of the Atarim. These are outer gods, creators from entirely different universes, who see an unguarded universe and decide they want to invade Earth. This lingering, massive threat is what actually sparks the sequel series, Solo Leveling Ragnarok, forcing Jin-Woo's son, Suho, to step up and defend the beautiful world his father sacrificed absolutely everything to protect.
And that brings us to the end of our timeline. Think back to where we started. What began with a terrified, bleeding, E-rank hunter desperately trying to scrape together pennies for his mother's hospital bills ended with a god walking through the shadows. The story of solo leveling is so much more than just a cool power fantasy about leveling up. It's the story of an unbreakable human will. It is the story of humanity's greatest protector. So I'll leave you with this. What would you sacrifice if you had the power to save everyone who didn't even know they were in danger? Think about that next time you look into the shadows. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time. Keep learning.